long time ago, there lived a very wealthy giant. To him belonged a great castle, which was surrounded by a large and lovely garden. Every afternoon, when they were let out of school, the children used to come to the giant's garden. It was a wonderful place for them to play. The ground was all covered with soft green grass, and here and there over the grass stood many beautiful flowers. There were 12 peach trees, which in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds would sit on the trees and sing so sweetly that the children used to pause in their play just to listen to them. And one would say to another,
"How happy we are here."
The children had never seen the giant to whom the garden belonged. He had gone away 7 years before to visit another giant who was a friend of his. But after he had stayed with his friend for 7 years, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and so it was that he determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived there and found the children playing in the garden, he became very angry.
"What are you doing here?"
The children were frightened and ran away, but the giant was not a bit dismayed. In fact, he was glad to see them go. He began at once to build a high wall all around the garden.
"My own garden is my own garden. Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself."
When he finished the wall, he tacked onto it a sign which read,
"Trespassers will be prosecuted."
He was a very selfish giant. The poor children now had nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander around the high wall when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. And one would say to another,
"How happy we were there."
The following year, when the spring came, there were little blossoms and little birds all over the countryside. But in the garden of the selfish giant, it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as no children were there. Even the trees forgot to blossom. One beautiful flower put its head out from under the grass and looked around.
"I wonder why the children are no longer here."
And then it saw the sign on the wall, which plainly read,
"Trespassers will be prosecuted."
What a pity.
And the beautiful flower was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only ones who were really pleased with the giant's selfishness were the snow and the frost.
"Spring has forgotten this garden, so we will live here all year round."
And the snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind.
"Come and stay with us."
And the north wind came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden, and blew the chimney pots down. He, too, was pleased.
"This is a most delightful spot. We must ask the hail to visit us."
So the hail came, and every day for hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates. And then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed all in gray, and his breath was like ice. Day after day, the selfish giant sat at the window and looked out at his cold, white garden.
"I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming this year. I hope there will soon be a change in the weather."
But the spring never came, nor did the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden but that of the giant.
"To him I shall give nothing. He is too selfish."
So it was always winter there, and the north wind, and the hail, and the frost, and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning the giant was awakened by what sounded to him like some lovely music. It was really only a little bird singing outside his window. But it was so long since he had heard a bird singing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. The hail had stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind had ceased roaring.
I do believe the spring has come at last.
And the giant jumped out of bed, hastened over to the window, and looked out. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see, there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about, and when the giant opened his window, he could hear them twittering with delight. The flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, except for one corner where it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. The tree bent its branches down as low as it could to help the child reach them.
Climb up, little boy.
But he was too tiny. As the giant looked out, his heart melted. He left the window and crept downstairs.
How selfish I have been. Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will go out and put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall. From now on, my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever.
The giant was really very sorry for what he had done. So he opened his front door quite softly and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away. And the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him up gently in his hand and put him into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it. And the little boy stretched out his two arms and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him.
Thank you so much.
The other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring. Then the giant took a great axe and knocked down the wall.
It is your garden now, little children.
Later that morning, when people passed by on their way to church, they were surprised to find the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye. I had a wonderful time.
But where is your little companion, the boy I put into the tree?
I don't know. He has gone away.
Then you must tell him to be sure and come here with you tomorrow.
But I don't know where he lives. I have never seen him before. Nor have I. Nor I.
When the giant heard this, he felt very sad. He loved the little boy best because he had kissed him. The others came and played with him every afternoon when school was over. But the little boy whom he loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for his first little friend and often spoke of him.
How I would like to see him.
Years went by, and the giant grew very old and very feeble. He could not play about anymore, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games and admired his garden.
I have many beautiful flowers, but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all.
One winter morning, the giant looked out of his window as he was dressing. He did not hate the winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep, and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly, he rubbed his eyes in wonder. He looked and looked. It was indeed a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were all golden, and silver fruit hung down from them. Underneath the tree stood the little boy he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy, and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and drew near to the child. When he came quite close, his face grew red with anger.
Who has dared to wound me?
For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on the little feet.
Who has dared to wound me? Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him.
Nay, but these are the wounds of love.
Who art thou?
And a strange awe fell upon the giant, and he knelt before the little child, and the child smiled on the giant.
You once let me play in your garden. Today, you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise.
And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossoms.